Hi, everyone. We've set up this Being an Engineer podcast as an industry knowledge repository, if you will. We hope it'll be a tool where engineers can learn about and connect with other companies, technologies, people, resources, and opportunities. So make some connections and enjoy the show.
Being able to explain what you're doing. And that's the big difference between most of the people that I find.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Being an Engineer podcast. We have a very special guest today, Matt Perez. Matt has been training users for the past 12 years and has worked professionally in CAD and CAM solutions for over 20 years. Through his company, CADucation, he provides top-level content creation services to software companies, helping train the next generation of designers, inventors, and creators. His company provides CAD and CAM digital training. He spends his time and energy creating educational content to help designers, engineers, and machinists connect the dots between their practical knowledge and their digital design tools of their choice. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Raphael.
Of course. So tell me, what got you into creating content to train machinists, engineers, and inventors? Walk me through the timeline of your career.
Yeah, well, I think like probably a lot of people, I started as a tinkerer, like a hobbyist, just wanting to do projects for myself. And through education, I learned AutoCAD and I learned mechanical desktop and Inventor and Unigraphics quite a while ago at this point. And in my professional career, I started with hand fabrication. So machining, welding, composites, things like that. And then eventually got into designing those things digitally. So I went from doing it by hand then to doing it digitally, which kind of gave me a little bit of an advantage because I knew how things went together before I started designing them. So I always felt like through traditional education that there were pieces missing, right? So if you go through a formal education for, let's say, engineering, the focus is on practical knowledge for engineering, and the CAD design side is typically an elective. You apply it through design projects, but for the most part, it's a very minor portion of that career path. So there tends to be a lot of hands-on learning, and learning in the software. So I was lucky enough to sort of do the reverse, and I learned all the hand application stuff first, and then I went to, doing it digitally. And I just found that there were always challenges associated with it for me. I never really could follow along the standard, step by step. So I always had to sort of go and figure things out. And one of the biggest challenges I had that I wanted to solve was modeling cars. That was like the big reason I wanted to do a lot of 3D design. So once I sort of had my aha moment and figured it out, I really didn't find very many references around. There wasn't a lot of content out there for teaching people how to design car bodies using things like SolidWorks. So I initially just did a PDF tutorial on how to do it, the process that worked for me that I figured out. And that was the start of it all, was just putting that out there.
And where can people buy or have access to this PDF tutorial?
Well, I mean, so that happened like 12 years ago at this point. It was just online on the SolidWorks forums, which have changed over the years. It was on a SolidSmack website for a while, and it kind of exists in a few places, but I don't really just have it publicly because it was at this point it was SolidWorks 2009 or 2010, so it's fairly out of date. So I don't host it or put it anywhere, but that was sort of the initial inception of the idea.
I think it's very nice of you to figure out a way to do something. Notice that nobody else seems like they were teaching it, or there's no content for it online, and you went ahead and created that. It's like you're making the world a better place with a little contribution. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
The next thing is, If we want to do that in today's world, we're in 2022, what resource would you recommend for us to learn surfacing in a rather, the more affordable, the better, quicker and affordable? Which would be the resource that you would point us to?
Right. Well, I mean, it's, I think over time, the way people learn has certainly evolved. People's attention spans have certainly evolved as well, or devolved, I should say. So a lot of people look to digest content in different ways. So there are a lot of videos on YouTube, for example, where you can get like a crash course, learn something in 10 minutes. I take the approach of doing the long method. So, I don't really support SolidWorks right now. I mainly focus on Fusion 360. But in the past, I've done a lot of SolidWorks content on different e-learning sites, things like Pluralsight, and O'Reilly Media, Coursera. There are just tons and tons of references. And it really just comes down to the user, how they learn, what style, they're looking for, and, how they're looking to digest that content. So, so for example, if you go to somewhere like Coursera or Udemy, that's structured like a traditional course that you would find at a university, right? So you have content that's sort of drip fed to you over a couple weeks. There are assessments, there are challenges that you go through. And that's, that works for some people. Some people want to dedicate an hour here, an hour there. And then other places you can go on YouTube and just find hours and hours of content. So it kind of just depends on how you are looking to digest the content. Now, specifically when we're talking about SolidWorks, if that's your main audience, then SolidWorks itself has its own e-learning content, right? They have the user section where you can take courses and look at free lessons and the built-in tutorials and so on.
The thing that I found is with a lot of SolidWorks tutorials, they're about tips and tricks and how to utilize the tools, but I haven't seen a lot of tutorials that show you how to actually design something for manufacturability or design it for how SolidWorks is used in the real world, which means you show it to the customer and they have feedback, that we have a design review and you have to make modifications to the design. It would be great if somebody will come up with a class and they would almost simulate that interaction with a customer and then show us, okay, this is what you do when the customer tells you to edit this. You go back to your SolidWorks and now walk us through the editing process. I don't know why anyone hasn't done that.
Right. Yeah. And so, when we speak about that professionally, for many years, I did custom training for companies. So, so for example, there was a company that came to me, or the company I was consulting through, and they wanted to learn API. They wanted to make their own add-ins for SolidWorks to perform tasks that they did, all the time. But there weren't really very good resources out there that were pointed to what they were looking to do, right? So I came in and I developed a course with 20 or 30 videos that taught them the basics and worked towards their end goal. And in their case, their end goal was to, again, make their own programs to sort of automate repetitive tasks. And that's very true in the industry, where you come across a lot of users who use the product over and over again, like they use it on a daily basis, but they're kind of missing some of the benefits of whatever software they're using, whether it's SolidWorks or not. In the case of SolidWorks specifically, things like design tables, and automating designs and configurations through using VBA and Excel, for example. So you can automate a lot. You can also use things like DriveWorks. So DriveWorks has a couple different versions of their software where you can develop an entire customer interaction portal on your website, and it'll configure the designs, create the engineering drawings, even email them to manufacturing and so on. So all these little things, they're very end user specific. So it is really hard to nail down a workflow that kind of works for everybody. And you have to piece it together. Unfortunately, a lot of people end up having to piece it together based on their requirements.
This is somewhat of a philosophical question, but this seems like there are very competent engineers at companies that need to receive this training on how to do the API, etc., different things on the software. What is it about you that you're able to figure out how to do this, but other very competent engineers were not able to figure out how to do it? What do you think is the thing that distinguishes you?
I think for me, so funny enough, before I began making tutorials, I never watched any. I didn't like go to how-to videos. I didn't go through training in a normal sense. I kind of, I went through like the help menu, and I tried to learn how things worked. And I think that's the difference, is learning how things work. Because if you go through just a standard tutorial that teaches you how to make, so for example, in SolidWorks, in the help file, like the design assistant, you used to do an old phone case for like plastic part design. They would walk you through that. But there are a lot of design decisions along the way that don't get explained. Like, you don't know why you're doing something. You just kind of know how you're doing it. And I think for me, I really needed to know why I was doing something. And I think that's why I've been able to be successful with it, because now when I get a problem, I can say, oh, well, there are 3 or 4 different ways I can solve that problem. And there are reasons why you do one over the other. So when you're talking about surfacing, for example, since that's the topic that you're on, why you would do a lofted surface over a sweep, over a boundary fill, over a patch, and sort of the implications behind all of that. So when you're learning to build a complex design out of surfaces, the surface quality is directly dependent on your sketches, the sketches that you put in, how you define splines, and then the tool that you decide to use, whether or not you're extruding a surface or you're lofting a surface. There are different qualities to those surfaces downstream. And unless you kind of explore on your own and understand the differences between each of those, then you don't really have all the information to make the right decisions when you start designing, because you're just kind of guessing. You know that, well, I used an extrude in this case, or I used a ruled surface in this case. I don't know why I did it, but I did it and it worked. So that's what I'm going to use.
That's a good point you bring up. How did you learn the why?
For me, it was figuring it out. And a lot of it is doing it wrong, intentionally doing it wrong sometimes, but other times kind of working yourself into a corner and then figuring out how to get out of it. So it's kind of the approach that I've taken recently. So, again, I mentioned I mainly focus on Fusion 360 right now. I think it's a great tool. It has a lot of functionality, and commercially available. It's extremely good. It's a good tool for the value. And I think what I've tried to do is I've tried to slow down the process and explain the different paths along the way. So in order to do that, you have to find them. You have to figure them out for yourself. And an example of that is with surfacing in Fusion 360, you kind of have to know the quality of the surface that you're getting out of those tools, very similar to SolidWorks. And then you have to kind of make the decision, well, do I extrude a surface? Do I sweep it? Do I loft it? All those different design decisions you need to explore and play with and figure out, well, is one surface better than the other? And to be perfectly honest, when you get down to manufacturing parts, a lot of these design decisions are more aesthetic than anything. And so when you're talking about consumer parts, if you're looking at like an Apple phone or anything that Apple makes, for example, they are extremely cautious about their curvature and the surface quality across edges. That is like their design ethos from the beginning, was very smooth, very rounded designs. And it's harder to do than you might think. It's not just extrude something and put a fillet on it. It takes a lot of work to get the curvature continuity out of those things. So kind of a lot like the series that you do where you reverse engineer parts. Well, take something that you have, for example, a light or a phone or some consumer product, and instead of just reverse engineering it, hold it up to the light, shine a light on it, rotate it around, see what the reflection does as it goes across those surfaces, and then try to replicate that. So, get to the point where you're making a render of it, or you're, rotating it around with a point light, and just trying to figure out how the surface continuity affects things.
I see. Well, switching gears now, tell me a little bit more about your website, CADucator.com. What do you offer? What is it about?
Well, I mean, the main thing I do right now is I produce content for software manufacturers. The main one that I focus on right now is Autodesk, and again, specifically Fusion 360, but also Inventor to a lesser extent. And I really found throughout my years of experience that doing content for resellers of software was great, but oftentimes it was only available to those resellers' customers. And then from there, going to e-learning sites was great, but a lot of e-learning sites have a very big focus on things like computer programming or Microsoft Office products. And it all comes down to publicizing the content that's available. So if you want the biggest reach for the content you produce, then getting it on the website of the actual software company is the best bet. So I go directly to the software companies and I create content for them. One of the benefits of doing this for Autodesk is that all of the content on their website is free. So any course content that gets created, and I cover surfacing and solid modeling, but also computer-aided manufacturing, simulation, generative design, basically any topic the software will cover, there's a course for it. And again, it's all free through them. And then in addition to that, I've also been, I created a YouTube channel called Learn Everything About Design. And where that differs from the content that I create for software companies really comes down to more of the missing piece, that how and that why. So when we do courses, when you follow along courses, there's generally an end goal, there's a project. But when I do content for YouTube, I can spend 40 minutes talking about an extrude. Now, maybe only 5 people want to hear that, but the information is still there and people can understand what happens if we change a fillet to a chord length as opposed to a constant radius. What happens if we change it to curvature continuous instead of tangent? And understanding those different design decisions along the way. When you create a course for a company, they don't want a 40-minute video on a fillet. But when you're talking about the design process for people that really want to understand it and learn the differences, a place like YouTube is a great resource because the video can just live there. And if somebody wants to find it, they can get to it. And if somebody doesn't want to watch it, they don't have to as part of a course, right?
Understood. I think this is a good time in the podcast to take a quick break and mention to our listeners that the Being an Engineer podcast is brought to you by Pipeline Design and Engineering. Pipeline partners with medical and other device engineering teams who need turnkey equipment such as cycle test machines, custom test fixtures, automation equipment, assembly jigs, inspection stations, and more. You can find us on the web at teampipeline.us. And one comment here, valued listeners, we need your help getting to 100 podcast reviews. You have a chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. Simply email a screenshot of your 5-star review to podcast@teampipeline.us, and the email will be in the show notes. We will announce the 5 lucky winners at the end of the first quarter in 2022. So here we are with my guest, Matt Perez. Matt, if I recall correctly, you're the first CSWP or CSWE, is that right?
Well, yeah. So back in, I'd say 2009, SolidWorks changed the testing platform from being on site in person to being virtual. And back then, I was one of the very first, public users that was CSWE certified. And what I mean by that is Most of the resellers, the applications engineers that worked at different resellers, a lot of those were required to get certified. And I think I was one of the first that was just sort of the general public.
Okay, I'm thinking about naming the title of the episode "The First CSWE." What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's not strictly true, right? Because there was experts before that certification. So CSWE was a thing, and it actually before it was a much more difficult exam. It was 6 hours, proctored in person, and you still had to be a CSWP beforehand and all that. But the structure kind of changed. So I don't know that that's strictly true. I wouldn't want to clickbait it.
No, we want to keep things accurate. Okay,
Yeah.
but you were one of the first CSWEs from what you mentioned.
So that first year, when I transitioned from working in Inventor to working in SolidWorks, I went into it. I leaned into it and got all my certifications. And well, I skipped the CSWA, but I did the CSWP, and I did all of the advanced exams that they had at the time. And that happened to be the year at SolidWorks World they were focusing on certifications. And so I was the guest at SolidWorks World for the general session to talk about my website at that time and the CSWE and that whole process.
I think, and if this is off limits, I totally understand. For our listener, this is almost an unfair question because I didn't let Matt know I was going to ask him this. So we can skip the question if you like, no problem. But I wonder about the world of business. So when you approach these companies, very big software companies, very corporate, it's hard to get a response sometimes when one is offering a service to them. How do you get people to respond to you when you offer them the services that you provide?
Well, it's kind of organic. And what I mean by that is I don't necessarily approach anybody. I have just created enough content publicly that is out there, and the people that are looking are able to find it. So here's a good example. Years ago when I started, there was a SolidWorks user, Matt Lombard, and he created these original SolidWorks Bibles. So surfacing, he was one of the original masters of that. And he was doing e-learning content, and he sort of passed my name along. And at the time I was doing content for resellers. So I went from doing it, strictly for resellers to doing it for e-learning companies. And that company got sold and they grew bigger, and I kept doing content for them. And then it sort of leapfrogged from there. And Pluralsight found me based on that content. And then it sort of leapfrogged from there. And Autodesk found me based on my Pluralsight content. And just through different contacts, I have contacts at different companies, and I just always have a feeler out there, just, hey, if you need some content, I'm available, let me know, that kind of thing. So I don't actively pursue anybody in that regard, because I'm lucky enough to have enough work on my plate that I keep myself and the couple people that work for me busy enough. So I don't have to actively pursue anything. But here's kind of the thing. In order to teach something, in order to truly get the point across and be able to do it fluidly, you have to really immerse yourself in it. So when I was teaching SolidWorks, I was mainly using SolidWorks. I learned everything I possibly could about the software, from DriveWorks to different add-ins to surfacing, simulation, everything. I then did some content for Onshape and for Inventor, and for all these different programs. But in order to do it effectively, you really have to immerse yourself in it. So for the past several years, I had really focused on Mastercam, and I focused on Autodesk. And, to that extent, I try to keep myself immersed in Fusion 360 and immersed in the technology that's changing to make sure that I can explore that. But I still maintain my level of knowledge with everything else that I've done. I don't want to get to the point where I couldn't pick up SolidWorks again, for example. or I couldn't open Onshape and make something. So it's a lot of work, but I do try to maintain a level of proficiency with as many pieces of software as I can.
I see. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you that you'd like to discuss and for people to know in general?
That's a good question. That's a very broad question.
It is broad. Yeah, you can take it wherever you want to.
Yeah. One trend that I've seen recently is that a lot of people want to learn things very quickly. And I kind of think one of the points that you made, I think in your CSWP prep is that you really need to prepare and you need to consume content. Now, for a lot of people, that's watching videos, right? Or following a tutorial or something. But personally, for me, I don't think that there is really a replacement for applying it. So I don't think that anybody can become truly proficient by just following along what somebody else is doing. I really think that you need to learn, you learn from the information that's available and then try to apply it on your own. Because if you can't apply it, then all you're really doing is just regurgitating the content that you followed. So you have to challenge yourself. Part of what you do and kind of reverse engineering or, taking objects that are around you, like a pen or whatever, that kind of stuff is important. And important in a sense that, so for example, with the pen, the pen example that you have, if anybody opens up a true, like a clicker pen, the mechanism inside there is an amazing piece of design and engineering. That it's in everything. So it's just become kind of commonplace. But if you actually take a pen apart and you look at how it's designed and try to replicate that mechanism, that is an excellent challenge to figure out not only how the mechanism works, but how you can model certain features. Like they have teeth along cylindrical faces. And it's important because the teeth have to match up with other teeth on another cylindrical face. So you really have to think long and hard about how you're creating geometry in order to get it to work. And those little challenges, those little kind of those aha moments of figuring out how to do something are almost priceless.
No, I appreciate that, Matt. So what Matt, for listeners, what he's referring about is I've done a SolidWorks series about mental mechanism library. That's what I called it. And thanks for the shout out, Matt, in which I basically grab any products, consumer products around us, everyday products. I tear them apart and I reverse engineer them on CAD, SolidWorks, and I teach people the mechanisms. And the very first video I did, which I will hyperlink in the show notes, is a multicolor pen. You know those pens that have 4 colors, the blue, black, red, and blue. You could just click on them and they change the color of the pen. The mechanism is what Matt was just describing now, and he is absolutely right. When I was doing this challenge of reverse engineering I come to points where I was quite frustrated, but I finally persevered and came out on the other end a better designer. So what Matt's saying is totally correct. Sometimes we have to go the long route, the hard way to become truly proficient. Did I say that right, Matt?
Yeah, exactly. Challenge yourself and learn from other people's designs. Like, I mentioned this in a series I'm recording now about, if you take a battery cover off of something, just look at it. Like, look at how it was designed, the openings, the way that the little slides work and the latches, and really look at it and understand how somebody had to come to those design decisions, and try to put yourself in that place, and then challenge yourself. Just if you can model what you see and understand the reasoning behind it, then you're preparing yourself for that next challenge.
Absolutely. Anything else? Well, I feel like we went on a good conversation thread here, and I feel like I want to ask you the same question again. Is there maybe something else that you would like to discuss here with the listeners that we haven't had a chance to?
Man, yeah. Again, open-ended question.
Right? Those are the hardest ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I already mentioned you can't really take a shortcut. You have to, just to kind of summarize, you can't just follow along what somebody else does. You have to do it for yourself. So make sure you challenge yourself, whether it's to design something that you see or to design something new. You have to challenge yourself to figure that out, whether it's SolidWorks, whether it's Fusion 360, whether it's whatever you're doing. And one thing that I have always sort of done in my life is push myself to learn something new. It doesn't necessarily have to be CAD. So, for example, right now I am working on Python, Python coding. And it's not something I necessarily need instantaneously, but it's something that has long-term value. So whether it's learning a new piece of software, I also explore things like Blender, which is a visual effects software. And, while I might not need it right now, maybe I'll need it in the future. So, never stop learning. Push yourself.
Beautiful. Well, Matt, how can people reach you?
Well, anybody can email me, support@CADucator.com. And, as I mentioned, I do have a YouTube channel, Learn Everything About Design. It's mainly focused on Fusion 360, but I cover circuit board design and Blender and programming. So all sorts of topics come up there, and it's meant to be a design resource more than just a software resource.
Actually, a good question popped up in my head, which is, you mentioned you have a team. How big is your team?
So right now, for the work I do, it's generally about 4 to 5 people. In order to produce content as quickly as I do, I have an editor on hand. I have somebody that generally helps with some content creation, like practice and challenge exercises and assessments, and also somebody that reviews documentation to make sure that the copy edit is fine. No grammatical errors and no just errors in documents in general. So typically keep it to about 4 or 5 people for a project.
What I find interesting is that a lot of people don't take that leap. They do everything themselves when they provide a service like consulting, like you mentioned, and you were able to assemble a team. So I think you're distinguishing yourself from all the other contractors or consultants. Could you maybe shed some light on how to go about finding the right pieces to assemble a team? Is there like a book that you read on this, or how does one take that leap from being solo to having a team?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would be lying if I said that I just took a leap and made it happen. I had done it slowly, where I had done everything myself, from recording and editing and sort of all the pieces of the puzzle. And I got to a point where that was a limitation. I knew that there was more work available and I couldn't keep up with the demand. So that's really the point when I said, okay, well, I need somebody to take on some of the tasks that take me a long time. Like I focused on the tasks that I was required to do, the ones like planning courses and recording videos. And then I said, well, not anybody, but somebody else could do editing of the videos, or somebody else could do creating some documents. And that allowed me to go from, doing 5 or 6 courses over a couple months to being able to do 1 or 2 in the process of a week.
But the thing is, this is very niche work. If someone edits your SolidWorks or your Autodesk video or Fusion 360, they need to be, I assume, right? They need to be proficient in the platform to know what parts to crop out of the video. Is that incorrect?
Yeah. So over the years, since I've done it long enough, I've gotten to the point where there are very few edits, thankfully. So we have a process in place where I can visually, or, I can call out mistake in the audio, and, that sort of calls out where edits need to happen. But I am lucky enough that the person that I hired to do editing is somebody that I actually trained in SolidWorks years ago. And by trade, he is a graphics designer, but also he's a CSWP. And, I've worked with him long enough that I know the quality of his work. I know what he's capable of, and he's efficient with it as well. So, we work really well together on these courses. Outside of that, I will say that for the past 5 years, I have tried to find another person to do what I do in terms of the course content. And I have not been able to do that. So it's been tough because there are standards that I have and I expect certain things, and it's hard for people to do this sort of as a job, right? A lot of people that make content do it sort of on the side, where I do it professionally as a job. Like that's 100% my focus. So it is a difference, and it is a distinction between myself and other places that do this kind of work.
Well, this is a good opportunity. We have some listeners. A lot of them are SOLIDWORKS proficients listening to this. What would be some of the things that you look for in a replacement of you, like you called it?
Yeah. So the big thing is the person needs to be an expert. All right. So when I say an expert, when you're teaching something and you don't know what you're teaching, it's very clear. So you have to know what you're teaching inside and out. That's key. Now I find a lot of people that are experts. I know a lot of people that know it inside and out. And the next piece of that puzzle is being able to explain what you're doing. And that's the big difference between most of the people that I find is, to do a 5-minute video, I am able to do it in 5 minutes. But some people will not feel comfortable with it, and they'll take 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour. And it takes a long time to get comfortable with explaining what you're doing, whether you're doing it after the video or not, but it just takes time. And I find that a lot of people don't put in the effort or the work, or just aren't naturally comfortable at doing that. So those are the two things. You need to be an expert in what you're trying to teach, and you need to be comfortable explaining what you're doing and why you're doing it.
And I imagine probably having a good sounding, clear voice is another factor, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be not only clear when you're trying to explain something, but you have to be mindful of what you're saying, right? Yeah, I mean, you can't just say, all right, we're making a sketch because we're doing it, or we're extruding this to extrude it. If you're trying to really teach somebody and convey it, then you have to be clear. Now, for myself, I was lucky enough to, again, start very small. I started making just some videos for resellers. And then I trained people, virtually one-on-one or in small groups. And when you have that back and forth with people, it's a little bit easier when you're talking to somebody and you're not just recording, recording audio. It's a little bit easier, and it kind of helps you find that. So spending a lot of time actually training people or teaching people does really help.
Amazing. Well, Matt, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm Aaron Monker, founder of Pipeline Design and Engineering. If you liked what you heard today, please share the episode. To learn how your team can leverage our team's expertise developing turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines, and with product design, visit us at teampipeline.us. Thanks for listening.